Today, we're going to make a round wooden mirror hung with a leather strap on Dwell Made. Before I can cut the circular shape for the frame, I first need to make an octagon that circle will be cut out of. So I set my miter saw to 22.5 degrees, and I made 8 trapezoidal pieces that when connected create an octagon. I set up a stop block so that each piece would be the exact same size. You may have already noticed this, but I could have made more efficient use of the 2x10. If I were to cut one piece, then flip it and use that angle that I had already established as the start of the next piece, I could have cut all of this out of a 10-foot section instead of a 12-foot. But because I cut all of my pieces in order, now when I lay out my octagon, the grain is going to run throughout the whole piece, and that's going to look a lot nicer. Whenever you're gluing end grain to end grain, it's important that you work the glue into the surface, like you see me doing here with the brush. It's a lot more porous than edge grain or face grain, so you want to make sure there's plenty of glue there and that it hasn't soaked in before it has time to dry. A ratchet strap makes easy work of clamping up odd shapes like this, and a belt sander is a really easy way to clean up all of those joints. With the octagon done, I needed to make the base for the circle cutting jig. Here's a 4-foot by 4-foot piece of particle board that I made reference lines from each corner and from center to center. Then, I got 2 3/4 inch sheets of plywood that equaled the same height as the octagon, and I attached the center base and pivot point to that piece of wood. Using those same reference lines, I lined up the center of the base, and I attached that to the piece of particle board. Now, I don't want my frame moving while I'm trying to cut a circle out of it, so I'm using 2-sided carpet tape to attach that to the base of my jig. And as you can see, I made a bunch of reference lines and measurements so that I could center it on my base. To cut the circle, I'm using the rockler circle and ellipse cutting jig. Now, it has pre-drilled mounting holes, but not for the router I'm using, so I drilled pilot holes and screwed it from the top of the base. It's a really simple jig to use, and the directions that come with it lay everything out pretty straightforward. I used a 3/4 inch double flute straight bit to create the recess that the mirror will set into. I only took about 1/4 inch with each pass. I didn't want to try and take too much and burn out my bit or cause too much strain for the router or the jig. After my first pass, I did get my mirror and make sure everything fit, which it did, and then I was able to cut that recess to its final depth, about 3/4 inch. Once the recess was cut, I switched to a 1/4 inch single flute straight bit, and I cut the inside and outside profile of the frame. I just adjusted the jig until it was cutting just on the inside of that recess, and I just took multiple passes until I reached the platform. Single flute bits are a great value, but because they only have one cutting edge, you need to make sure you go slower and not overwork the bit. And finally, I adjusted the jig to create a 2-inch wide frame. The other challenge that single flute bits have are creating grooves where they can't eject the chips very easily. So as you can see, after I cut a section, I would back up with the router so that I was able to clear out the chips from the recess. As most of you know, end grain to end grain joints aren't the strongest, so I used my biscuit joiner for reinforcement. I made sure to center each cut, that way the leather strap would eventually cover up these biscuits. Now, I wasn't very careful with the scrap wood from this project, but I removed the frame really carefully from the platen. I didn't want to stress it or break it. Once it was free, I used my sander to clean everything up, from 80 to 150 to 220 grit sandpaper. I really enjoy using water-based finishes on light woods. It tends to keep them from yellowing too much, so I put on 3 coats of polyacrylic. My buddy Benueta gifted me this big leather hide from Tandy Leather not too long ago, and it's the perfect piece for this project. Because I need such a long strap, I'm going to have to laminate and splice 3 pieces together. I couldn't find a single piece of leather long enough for this project. So I cut out 3 strips and I layered those so that I had a really long strap that could reach all the way around the mirror and be hung from it. Now, I haven't done a ton of leather projects, but I found that contact cement works great for attaching leather to leather and leather to wood. For the strongest bond, it's best to coat each of the pieces you want to attach with the rubber cement, let them dry for about 10 minutes, then put the pieces together. Once I had my strap made, I got my straight edge back out and I re-established one straight edge. Then, from there, I measured an inch in and I cut a 1-inch thick strap. A razor blade or a utility knife is great for cutting leather. It's super sharp and really cheap. I was able to center and attach the leather strap pretty well by eye. I just worked my way around, making sure not to attach the frame to the strap at the very top. I needed to make sure that would be able to hang freely. After that had dried, I was able to drop in my mirror as well as the 36-inch backer piece that I cut out of a 1/4-inch piece of plywood. And to hold everything in place, I just used some finished nails attached to the frame. I'll be using a 2-inch pine dowel to hang the mirror from. I cut it to 1.5 inches long, then I drilled a hole right in the center of it that I was able to attach a hanger bolt to. It has a wood screw on one side and a machine screw on the other. Once I found the perfect place on the wall, I drilled a hole in the drywall and used a heavy-duty drywall anchor rated up to 75 pounds to screw the hanger bolt into. Once it was attached to the wall, I added some epoxy to the bolt and I screwed on my dowel. Once I waited about 10 minutes for that epoxy to cure, I could hang my mirror. Overall, I am really happy with how this project came out. The majority of my builds use mostly wood, so anytime I'm able to experiment with a new material like leather, I really enjoy that. It's a lot of fun. If you're not already, I'd welcome you to follow our Instagram account @DwellMade and subscribe to this channel for more Dwell Made videos. My name is Mike Montgomery, and thanks for watching.